This is the Sony A7 III, one of the most revolutionary cameras of the last decade, and now one of the cheapest full-frame cameras on the market today. But 5 years later, with massive competition, is it still worth buying what was once my favorite camera of all time? All right, so today is a little bit of an impromptu video. I didn't expect to be talking about the A7 III today, but a lot has just changed and we need to kind of dig into it. But I did change out the mic setup, so let me know. The shotgun mic I've been using, I just haven't been impressed with the sound lately. I don't know if it's me, the processing of it. I haven't been impressed with what I'm getting out of this room. So hopefully this improves things a little bit more. I'm still kind of getting used to talking into a mic this close to me, but we'll see how it goes. But it's been 5 years since the A7 III dropped, and the price is just insanely low right now. I actually started seeing a flood of comments on some of the A7 III videos, so I think we need to revisit talking about the camera. Now, obviously, I've upgraded from the A7 III to the A7 IV, but I do still have tons of content on the A7 III. I have a full help guide, like how to set up the camera. I have camera reviews, I have comparisons, just a ton of stuff. So check all of that out. And on the A7 IV, I do have a pretty cool 2-year review of it dropping next week. Like, it's uploaded and everything. So if you're looking at upgrading to this camera, definitely check that one out. Yet it's on sale. It's just $1,000 more than the A7 III right now. So we definitely need to break this down. I think the best way to kind of put the A7 III in a comparison is to talk about what's changed with the A7 IV and newer cameras and see if those changes actually mean anything in the real world, especially depending on how you want to use the camera and what you want to get out of it. So the A7 IV, Sony improved the grip in it. The buttons, some of them are a little bit larger, but overall they just have a much nicer feel to them. And you'll just notice these kind of random tweaks all over the camera. And now you have a flip screen, and it is higher resolution. Also, the viewfinder did get an upgrade as well. And all of these sound really nice, but I think the only one that you'll really notice, unless you're comparing these side by side, is the screen. Now, the screen on the A7 III, it's technically a touch screen, but it doesn't really work that well as a touch screen. You can't control the menu at all from the screen. It's really only for touch focus, and even that doesn't work as consistently and as well as it should. And overall, the entire interface, but especially from that touch screen, it just feels a bit laggy. It's also not the best quality screen, and 5 years later, I think that's just one of the areas that it's really starting to show its age. But the A7 III, it's still great hardware. You have plenty of customization on it. There's a joystick for moving your focus points around. You have dual cards. You have really great battery life. And it's still a very compact camera for something high-end. And I think that's a big difference you'll see between that and a lot of the competition in this price range. So the competition is really just more lower-end consumer-ish cameras that happen to be very good, while the A7 III is more of a high-end camera that happens to be a few years older. So we've shot weddings on the A7 III. In fact, we have an entire behind-the-scenes video from one of those weddings shot on the A7 III. And I wouldn't recommend getting something like a Canon R8, which is also $1,300. If you plan on doing pro level shoots like that, the Sony A7 III is going to be a better camera. The other thing that kind of goes along with that is the interface and usability, which I think was one of the weak spots for the A7 III. But again, I do have a full menu help guide that walks you through literally every item in the camera menu. So if you're going to be buying the camera, that's definitely going to help you a lot getting started. But the interface itself, it's just a little clunky. There were a few items that just didn't make as much sense as they should. And the camera, it's just overall, it still feels a little slower when you're operating the menus compared to a lot of the newer cameras out there. Nothing you can't get over, though, especially if you're not using it side by side with something like the A7 IV. But if you do spend a lot of time kind of in the menu system especially, it's just not going to be as fluid as it would on some of the newer cameras. Now, part of the reason for this is that another thing that's been improved over the years is the processor. And talking processors, it's not exactly sexy, but that's what makes the menus feel faster. That's what allows autofocus to have some extra features. And that's what makes a massive difference for video, which we're going to get to in a second because there are a lot of changes on the video department. But let's kind of break down autofocus first. So I think for most of us, autofocus is going to be important. And the good news is that the A7 III actually had amazing autofocus. This was one of the best parts about the camera when it launched. So it's actually aged very well in that department. And it's still going to be very snappy. The eye tracking, which for a 2018 camera was just amazing. So you're going to have full eye tracking on it, although not for video, just for photos. But the big improvement of kind of these later generation cameras like the A7 IV is going to be more of when you want to tap on a subject on the screen and have the camera track around the frame. So a lot of tracking improvements on these newer cameras. I personally use this all the time now with like the A7 IV, but not everyone is going to need this kind of tracking performance. A lot of people that have the camera are going to be perfectly fine just moving the focus points around or just keeping the autofocus in more of an auto mode. There's also a lot of photographers like landscape photographers, portrait studio photographers that don't really need this kind of tracking at all for anything they do. So for them especially, I think the A7 III autofocus is still going to be plenty good, but overall, even compared to a lot of cameras today, it's still right on track. Now, video is actually where things get very interesting because I think on paper, the A7 III still holds its own with 4K, you have log, you have 120 frames per second in 1080p for slow motion. I've used the A7 III myself to shoot some really amazing projects, but there is a lot going on here behind the scenes. So first, let's get a few nerdy things out of the way. All of Sony's latest cameras and most of the competition now has something called 10-bit video, which essentially means that there's way more information in these video files. But should you actually care? And I think if you want to shoot log or do more color grading in post, then yes, it actually should matter a lot. You should care. I think Sony's video files don't respond very well to color grading, especially back with the A7 III. That was a weak spot. And the new 10-bit cameras from Sony, like the A7 IV, made massive improvements to this. But if you're just shooting like the standard picture profiles and you don't want to do just a ton of grading in post, you can still tweak the colors pretty good on the A7 III and get some really awesome looking video. But if you're shooting things like log, those new 10-bit cameras are just a massive improvement. But video is where other cameras have really pushed the limit in terms of like frame rates, codecs, autofocus, 10-bit recording, even in-body image stabilization is going to be better on most newer cameras. So while the A7 III, it can shoot video, and again, I've used the camera for just a ton of projects back a few years ago, but there are definitely better cameras for video, even at this price range or for a little bit more. So I wouldn't go and buy the A7 III if you plan on using it for high-end video. Now, here's what hasn't changed: image quality. And it's kind of surprising that over the last 5 years, there really hasn't been much improvement with image quality, but it's true. Some of the latest cameras might be a little higher resolution. The A7 IV now is 33 megapixels, but some aren't. 24 is still kind of the standard for a lot of cameras right now. But the tech behind these sensors is largely the same. So the quality on the A7 III, it's still going to be great, even in low light. The dynamic range on the A7 III is actually better than a lot of cameras in 2023. So if quality is what you're after, the A7 III is going to be one of the best quality cameras at this price. Although one thing that has changed a little bit over the years is color. The A7 III was one of the first cameras that improved color, so it definitely isn't bad on that camera. Like, you're not going to look at your images and have people looking all like green and yellow, but they have improved things even more over the years. So the A7 III wouldn't be my favorite camera from a color perspective, especially for things like portrait photographers. At the same time, it's definitely not bad enough not to buy this camera just because of the color. But 5 years later, the competition has also kind of got their act together. So there's a lot going on, especially on the video front. But Sony has really dropped the price of the A7 III here. So if you want to stay under $1,500, the options, especially for full frame cameras, are still going to be a bit limited. So if you're a photographer and you're trying to beat the Sony A7 III, I'd say the best competition is probably going to be the Canon R8. And if you look at it this way, so the Canon R8, it's more of an entry-level full-frame camera. So it's more basic. There are not a whole lot of pro-end features. There's not like dual card slots. It's a bit plasticky. There's no joysticks. And it's brand new though. So things like autofocus and video do have some improvements. And it does still have a full-frame 24 megapixel sensor, which is actually from the higher-end R6 II. So it's actually very good quality. But keep in mind that Sony has a much more impressive lens selection for the A7 III, and I'd say the A7 III is still a better camera overall for photos, unless you're more that entry-level photographer and you would prefer to have something that is easier to use and super compact. Now for video, it's another story. So first of all, with video, giving up a full frame and going with a crop APS-C camera is really not a big step down, because the quality is actually very dependent on how the video is processed, even more so than the size of a sensor. So with the newer processors, the low light performance between kind of the older full frame cameras and these newer APS-C cameras are almost the same. So even with small sensor cameras like the A6700, Sony's A6700, it has massive improvements for video in literally every area. Even the Canon R8 comes out slightly ahead for video. And another one of my favorites for video at this price is going to be the Panasonic S5. Again, Panasonic didn't have the greatest tracking autofocus with this one, but it is full frame, and it does have a ton of features on it for video. And the quality is great, especially for stills as well, because it's full frame. Now, Nikon also has the Z6 II on sale, and I actually really liked that camera. It's still going to be a little bit more expensive than the A7 III, but it does have quite a few improvements, especially for video. It's still going to be full frame, so the quality is going to be similar, and it has the ability to shoot in 4K up to 60 frames per second, as long as you don't mind a little crop. So if you can stretch your budget a little more and video is important, the Z6 II is going to be a very solid camera if you can't quite afford the Sony A7 IV. But at this price, I mean, this is freaking tempting. Under $1,300 for a camera this amazing that does so much. It was literally the best camera around when it was announced. It's going to feel a bit old with the interface and the slower menu system and kind of that touch screen especially, but the quality of the images is spot on. The hardware is still very high end for $1,300, and it can shoot high quality video even if it isn't the camera I would buy for video. So overall, it's still a very good camera. But if you have any specific questions, definitely hit me up in the comments. I'm also going to throw a list of my favorite lenses and accessories for the A7 III and the A7 IV in the description. And again, this new video on the A7 IV is coming next week. So if you do buy the A7 III, let me know in the comments or hit me up on IG or something, and I'll send you a coupon code for my menu help guide, because you really need that to get the most out of the camera. But hope you guys are doing amazing. Enjoy whatever camera you have though. Remember, like, upgrading isn't everything, so keep shooting, and until next time, that's a wrap.